Hello, my friends. We're going to talk about quantitative tightening. Now, what quantitative tightening is, it's the direct opposite of quantitative easing. First, for some people out there might not know what quantitative easing is. Well, the Fed had to stimulate the economy after the great crisis of 2008. And how they did it was through a process called quantitative easing. It was unsterilized monetary stimulus. And what I mean by unsterilized is that they were injecting money into the liquidity into the system. Basically, what it amounts to is monetization of the debt, monetization of the entire system. And it's creating money, basically creating pure money and injecting it into the system. And they did this to the tune of $4.5 trillion. That's over $4,000 billion worth of this over a period of years. They had I think it was four programs: quantitative easing 1, quantitative easing 2, what was called Operation Twist, and then the final one was quantitative easing 3. Now what they've engaged upon, now what happened was is that increased liquidity within the system tremendously and made the system awash with liquidity. That liquidity is what's driven an awful lot of things. It's driven consumer inflation. That liquidity in the system it's driven the stock market up to the highs the stock market is now. It's driven the real estate market up. It's driven up an awful lot of things like fine art and just all kinds of things that went up because of quantitative easing. Because quantitative easing is basically inflating the bubble. So picture it like a giant balloon. It's like inflating the balloon with helium. That's quantitative easing. Quantitative tightening is exactly the opposite. It's letting air out of the balloon. And so it's not completely the exact opposite. It involves three different things. One of the things it involved is a central bank hangs on to their portfolio of bonds until these bonds mature. And then what they do is instead of rolling them over and buying bonds, what they do is they don't buy any new bonds. They let the old ones mature and they cash them in basically for the money. What that does is that draws the money out of the system. I believe they actually burn that money. They actually get rid of that money that they withdraw. So that's the first thing they do. That's the first part is taking these, holding these bonds until they mature, and then getting the cash for them. And that cash comes directly out of the system, thereby making less money in the system. Now they're doing that right now. And another thing that they're doing right now is they are actually selling their current portfolio of bonds. So they're adding more bonds into the system to sell. And the third part of what they're doing is they're increasing rates. These are all pieces of the puzzle of what we call quantitative tightening. Now, this withdrawing of liquidity from the system is the exact opposite of what brought the system back up and made the system strong back after the 2008 crisis. So if you prop something up, like say a table only has 3 legs, and say if you pull that third leg out, the table will fall over, but you stick something in as a makeshift leg under the table. And then you say, okay, now I'm going to pull that leg out that I put in to hold the table up. Well, it's obvious the table's going to fall over. And this is the way with the system. They used their portfolio of bonds, the Federal Reserve, $4.5 trillion worth, to prop the system up. The system is still being supported by that $4.5 trillion, and now they're hauling that back out again. It should be a no-brainer to everyone out there that at a certain point the system's going to come down as they haul this out. They're hauling out the support under the system. And so I believe it would, except for a couple things. One, there's an awful lot of corporate buybacks. That's been helping the stock market tremendously. A second thing is we've seen a lot of tax rebates. Seen a lot of money coming in from that direction. A lot of liquidity. And the third part is, that's been happening quite recently, is these trade tariffs, which have a tremendous effect on inflation. they increase inflation. They raise the price of just about all goods across the board, which is inflation. This counters the effect of what the Federal Reserve is actually doing in letting these bonds mature and taking money out of the system. Taking money out of the system causes prices to fall. So the Fed is getting away with this to a certain degree. This, you have to understand that this quantitative tightening, I'm going to read to you exactly what it says here. The main goal of quantitative tightening is to normalize, raise interest rates in order to avoid increasing inflation. As it becomes expensive to access money and reduce demand for goods and services in the economy, like quantitative easing before it, quantitative tightening has never been done before on a massive scale, and its consequences have yet to be materialized and to be studied. So what they're doing is are they using all of us as guinea pigs for something that's never been tried before, this quantitative tightening? Well, I mean, I personally can see that the quantitative tightening is exactly the opposite of quantitative easing. Well, so far, they started last October, and they started very, very slowly, this quantitative tightening. They're really only starting to get into the meat of it now. They're up to 40 billion a month. When they first started, it was only 10 billion a month. It's almost not noticeable. 20 billion a month in January, February, March. May, June, and July, 30. Now, July, August, and September, 40. So they're just getting into the solid part of it. Now it's going to go to 50. October, November, December, 50 billion. My point is, even though this has never been tested, if a guy on some planet where nobody had ever seen fire before said, okay, we've something that's never been tested before, we're going to light this guy on fire with gasoline or whatever. Okay, it's never been tested before. But you know what the results are going to be. It's not going to be pretty. Well, that's the way with this quantitative tightening. Just because it's never been tested before, just because the Fed's got away with it so far, or seemingly got away with it. And like I said, I listed 3 reasons why the Fed's got away with it so far. There, just a minute ago. 1 is tax rebates. 2 is a rising stock market, a lot of exuberance about the Trump election, and the magnificent run up after the Trump election in the stock market, all the way up through the low 20s, all the way to 26,500. A tremendous amount of liquidity being injected into the system by cryptocurrencies is another thing that I failed to mention. And believe me, that's a lot of money. The cryptocurrencies were up to $750 billion, and they deflated down to $295 billion. That's about more or less $400 billion. Where do you think that money went? Maybe that is part of the reason why that's offset. That money coming out of cryptocurrencies as liquidity is poured into the system and has offset the amount of liquidity that the Fed's been draining off. But here's the thing. Bitcoin's just about done. Maybe it'll go a little bit lower. But it's certainly not going to pour hundreds of billions into the market anymore. It doesn't have hundreds of billions to pour into the market anymore. That was a one-time trick. You know, it pouring 400 billion into the market. The whole market cap now is not 400 billion, so it can't do it again. Right? It poured all that money into the system. And so that's part of why the Fed's got away with draining the money out the other side, is because the money poured in from the one side and they drained a bit out from the other side and they got away with it. But now the Fed's going to continue. They're not going to stop. In fact, they're going to increase it to 50 billion a month. I think the whole effect of this has just been a state execution. In other words, what I'm saying is earlier on my channel, like a few months back, I was talking about the trouble starting now. I think there's a few things I didn't see. One of the things I didn't see was this liquidity coming in from a popping Bitcoin bubble. This liquidity pouring back into the system from that. Some $400 billion, almost a half of $1 trillion pouring back into the system to offset what the Fed's doing. Plus, these buyers coming in from the banks to buy the bonds that the Fed has been selling, and the Fed has been and what's been offsetting the money that they've been rolling over, the $40 billion a month they've been rolling over every month. What's been offsetting that is is like I say, $400 billion worth of liquidity pouring into the system. So we got away with it up till now. Now they're going to keep pushing the button. They're like a monkey pushing a button. And he's just going to keep pushing that button until something happens. And that's what the Fed's like. They're just going to keep pushing this button until the system collapses. Then they're going to squeak like a monkey when something falls on its tail. Yeah! You know, and they're going to be all excited, you know, and they're going to try to do something. They're going to try to fix everything. And that's when they're going to, what I call, release the floodgates of money. They're going to open up the doors and let the money flow freely. Just like they did back in 2008, except this time more so. And the reason why more so is because this is going to be a bigger problem. It's going to come along suddener. What happened in 2008, they were able to basically stop it from completely melting the system down. I think this time we're going to go into a meltdown. And I think that it's going to take an awful lot more to bring it back. And I think that that's going to be the trigger for our hyperinflation. That's when you're going to want to be holding silver, gold, and Bitcoin, Litecoin, and all that kind of stuff. Because that's when the dollar is going to get destroyed. And it's going to happen lightning fast. So anyway, this has been a little bit of an update on what's going on. Thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next show. Bye-bye.